Egunon.
Okay, so good morning and welcome everybody. Thank you very much and welcome all to this Congress. She's speaking in Basque language right now.
Publiko-pribatua da. Aurten beti ditugu 30 urte, eta hasieratik 19 kide izatetik, gaur egungo ia 40 kide izatera, igaro gara denbora tarte honetan, eta horrek gure metropoliko ordezkaritza orokorra ematen digu. Comenzaba esta presentación.
So we started this introduction with saying what Bilbao Metropolis 30 has done, PPP, that is in his 30th anniversary with almost 140 associated companies. One of them is Petronor, who's the founder of Bilbao Metropolis 30, and it basically works in building a strategic view on the long term for our metropolis with and for its partners. Our association has a focus on that long-term view, and our participation in this SUM Congress comes through the strategic character of mobility for the future in urban environments, and as it couldn't be differently, for the city of Bilbao. There are some things that are present in the strategic reflection process that Bilbao Metropolis 30 is fostering with its associated entities with the goal of 2035, and in some way they put the focus on the bond between mobility and the future of our city, and with many other variables. In my case, in a brief way, you'll allow me to share with you some of them. First of all, has to do with the world urbanization process that we are witnessing. An urbanization and metropolization process that together with this process, we have all the mobility processes, because the creation of a city, of a metropolis, has to do with transport systems that are highly efficient, that in an interterritorial sphere, and contribute to create that sense of belonging. In the case of Bilbao Metropolis, that's been key to create that feeling of metropolis and not 30 municipalities that share common space, but it is linked as you know with it's linked with a shared industrial past, etc. And mobility has been key. But at the same time, mobility is an economic sector that generates 18 billion profit in our environment, that gives work to more than 20,000 people, and it's obvious that the number of meetings that we can hold when they are face-to-face meetings in an urban environment makes that with the more meetings, the more competitive an environment is. But these are not the only variables where mobility has an impact on. Obviously, during these days, we will speak about things that are linked to mobility, sustainability, decarbonization, sustainable energies, the impact of climate change, and technology is highly linked to mobility, and it will help us use resources in an efficient way. But I would like to end up with two more variables. The first one, the one that has to do with health. Well, of course, to foster walking by foot or using the bike, etc., that will improve our citizens' health, and not about the air pollution, etc. But just to end up with this, I would like to say how important the quality of life is. Because you know this concept of that 15-minute city that advocates to have urban environments where we are able to give an answer to what human beings need in just 15 minutes, in that distance. that will entail that cities recover that neighborhood life to some extent. Of course, the pandemic that we are about to finish will have an impact on the mobility in our cities. This side event will put the focus on many of these changes that maybe can be temporary or are here to stay. People that will take the floor after Miguel and myself and the roundtable will have the goal of analyzing those trends that will affect the mobility of our cities in the future. But however it is, what we bring to this discussion table is that strategic long-term view. If there's an element that is going to be able to change the physiognomy of our cities in the future, that element would be mobility. And without further ado, I will give the floor to Miguel Palacio, who is with me here today. He's a senior consultant of mobility at Petronor Innovación, and he will speak about the energy view of the mobility scenarios and new ways of mobility and decarbonized energies for our metropole. Becerra Miguel. Hello, good morning. First of all, thank you very much, Idoia, for inviting me to share these initial reflections that, of course, will be the introduction to the panel of experts. Why is Petronor in Bilbao Metropole 30? Well, first of all, for us, it's key to be in those discussions of that long-term strategic view. We always do it from the energy side as a company that is included as an integrated company for energy supply, both Petronor and Repsol Group. And yes, it is a discussion that is necessary in order to identify what are the energy needs that the new trends of mobility will have in the future. From the local point of view, we always think that, well, of course, there's a general framework where there are trends that should be taken into account. There are projects that we should take into account. But I always say that there are no magic formulas that fit for every city. Bilbao and its city, they have their difficulties, their possible long-term improvements, and we should try to identify them well and to look for solutions so that they can be solved. So from that point of view, Bilbao Metropole 30, well, obviously it has this analysis of closeness, so to speak, of not using general solutions, but to identify them in a very specific way. And from the energy point of view and the long-term strategy, I will speak about what we have done in the company so that people that are listening to us can identify how important it is to have that long-term view. In the year 2000, and when the hydrocarbons law was liberalized, we started to speak about autogas, and that it was trying to solve some pollution problems that many cities had, not all of them, as you can imagine. Climate change was starting to be tackled, but it was something that was not important as it is today. So as any other change, in terms of mobility scenarios change, it was started with something that I always put on the table. The egg or the hen. Of course, we need to have points of supply, in this case GLP, as I'm putting as an example, and others will come, but the market, the stakeholders, the vehicles are not. It's like, who's going to come before, and how can we accompany them in that long-term strategy and betting on those scenarios? 10 years later, that project was a reality, and now we obviously can have a GLP vehicle without having to make any previous planning before the trip, and we can fill our tanks in more than 600 stations of the group. In year 2010, when just very few started to speak about electrical mobility, the company was betting on a PPP together with Eleve in order to create a company that could provide services of recharging services for electric vehicles. Living. This project was launched, and the technology part was not very mature. It was about to be developed. The electric vehicles had an autonomy that we can't see today, 100 kilometers maximum, and it was key. I mean, it was obvious the lack of points of supply on the public sphere. 10 years later, we've seen how this world has evolved, how both vehicles and the points of supply have evolved, and how technology has accompanied everything, making that these vehicles that have a higher autonomy can be recharged faster. And here in Euskadi, we are a great example to have a fast charge when we didn't have fast charge, and ultra fast charge when we are launching a new way of charging. And what will we do during this decade? Hydrogen. Again, the hen or the egg? If the audience has been listening to the previous sessions, we are speaking about hydrogen buses, new elements of mobility, but of course, we need to have that hydrogen from the supply chain, from the production, logistics, the supply points, and of course, the mobility elements should exist to, this market will have to evolve. And we will have a long way to go with that hen, that egg, and to make an important bet as a company to be there when this necessary is needed and where it is needed. As we can see during these decades, we have had some examples of how the future scenarios are important in order to be discussed and to visualize them so that we can face these future supplies. Of course, it's not only hydrogen. We have the synthetic fuels and other decarbonized ways that we're betting on in our company. And eventually, what I would say is that, well, the mobility of the future has to be decarbonized. There's no doubt about that. It has to be digital. Because in this case, I've only talked about energy, but of course, energy entails many other aspects that should be taken into account. So it has to be digital and it has to be diverse. There are many ways to move in a sustainable way. And we'll have to see which one better fits the problem solving that we were saying before, and something very important. The one who uses mobility should be in the center so that it's easy for him to move. This is important. By the digital, well, in hand with mobility and the new technologies, well, this will happen. And maybe we can give the floor to the experts that will set very clear future scenarios. Yeah, we're going to start with the panel of experts. Thank you very much. I'm sure that we have many things to learn from them. Thank you.
Muy bien. Buenos días. Gracias, Idoia.
Okay, so thank you very much. Good morning. Thanks to Bilbao Metropolis30 for facilitating this dialogue between experts, and thanks to Petronor for participating in the think tank and giving us this little space in some Bilbao. So just to give you some context, the dynamic of scenarios was started at this think tank in vehicles 7 years from now. 4 years ago, in 2017, we started to think about it. In 2018, we had set it up. We had an environment that was different. We were interested by industry in order to give traction to other sectors that generates industry, value chains that every other industry take advantage of in order to be competitive. And when we saw the automotive sector with overwhelming messages that were speaking about cautious and slow energy transition towards concepts like, well, the EV, for example, the electric vehicles was quite a new concept and something that was quite distributive, although you could think that that's not the case. Well, it's been 20 years since then, and now we have dynamics like hydrogen, for example, but by then we didn't have the EV, we didn't have Trump with populisms taking the American Congress, we didn't have wars, commercial wars, to see how important they were. We had Europe in the middle, and current geopolitics has changed a lot with an energy resource that is a key resource, and with something emerging that was the climate change that could be as changing coin among regions. So with this context, we see the digital world as an enabling layer for other industries and with a very neutral role. We saw that it could be convenient to analyze all this complexity for the future in the world, in a globalized world, and to try to set concepts like mobility, for example, that bring people together. Mobility of people, for example, with the key sectors like tourism, automotive sector, linked with agricultural food in Spain, and related to last mile and digital commerce. And it's a sector that includes health, because we need to have safe feeding, and we've seen that with the COVID. It has nothing to do with the world in 2018. We organized a multi-sector dynamic with a very integrative methodology, the Oxford one, where different sectors are used to doing it, as we saw with the agricultural world, when Europe wanted to have a common agricultural solution, and in this case, so for the mobility sector, integration energy, traditional energy, and other sources of energy, where we have Petronor and you have other competitors that are fighting and competing on the long run. The automotive sector, the financial sector, insurances, technological industry, telecommunications, that's key. The interoperable piece of data, the European regulation, we included agents as European regulators, the EPSI, the Digital Europe. So we have a panel of around 100 of top-level experts focused on Europe, and among all, we should understand how this mobility challenge could flow. So in this context, stakeholders like the ones that we have on the table were participating, and the first step was in Bilbao. From Bilbao we moved to Stuttgart, and there we were able to integrate in Daimler and to see their innovation center. And in that moment we came back after changing a lot, because Daimler was migrating to electrical vehicles, and their innovation center had many startups seeing different business models, service models, mobility as a service. They had a pilot project with Nokia regarding 5G. And we came back and we saw that the message of the listed companies in the automotive sector is that they had to be cautious that this is not going to change yet. A very logical message, but a message that was useless in such a think tank as the one that we wanted to integrate. Why? Because the SMEs could be really lost with the messages that we were launching from sectors that publicly or politically are right. But sometimes they confuse people that if they have to make mid or long-term decisions because maybe you don't have access to higher level forums. So with this information and the group dynamics, we evolved in Barcelona, integrating the City Council of Madrid, and we concluded with 3 scenarios that we have been keeping with time. One of them has to do with the growing world. We would say the big is beautiful, and here everything has to do with the fact that Europe is well understood. There's a European regulation, there's a common challenge in Europe. We see that there's a possible growth, and Europe is taking that pace. Another scenario has to do with a slippery slope, and it's about a slope that sleepers, sorry, and it has a world that is much more similar to current world, a Europe that has problems to understand itself and to reach agreements, or at least at a very much slower pace than the one that other countries could accept, like China or the US. And the third scenario was speaking about a world where citizens are more empowered. Miguel was speaking about that. The citizen in the center that plays the part of being that tractor machine. It generates offer and pushes demand and pushes supply and demand. So we should have affordable and feasible transport that is not pollutant, that is sufficient, that has mobility based on services. Maybe the attractive of having a car couldn't be as attractive as, for example, having an app according to which you can move and share a service. And maybe that's not the best scenario, of course. On the one hand, generating supply has to do with Europe coming together just to position itself in front of the US and China. And at the other end, we find that the citizens are pushing and makes politics being more dynamic because they consider that this new way of life is more attractive. And in the middle, we have that complexity. So here, we have many questions. With the COVID, we reviewed all these actions and we set some working groups. Specifically, we had 6. One of them was social impact that was led by the City Council of Bilbao and Metropolis 2030 just to put the emphasis on it. Another one put the emphasized the urban mobility, and was I-10 urban mobility who led it. One of public transport was led by the Metropolitan Transport and in Madrid. In the case of telecommunications, the National Observatory of 5G, the automotive sector was led by Grupo Antolin, and the EV infrastructure project was led by Ormazábal and Prato of Bertia Group. Some aspects like hydrogen, for example, were not as hot as they are right now. And we were starting from scenarios where the light electrification was an important challenge. Maybe during this year and following years, the hydrogen will be increasingly important, as well as the, maybe we could be speaking about 7 years, the next 7 years, and of course there will be discussions of when hydrogen will start to play a part, how it impacts mobility, and what we have to do And what we have to say is that it is an actor that had not been integrated in the city, in the mobility of the cities. Maybe it could take a little bit longer to be there. And this is why we won't insist that much on this meeting, but both for the electrical and energy system and the mobility layer, it's not something that we should take into account. Out of the 6 of them, the social impact, and with Bilbao Metropolis 30 managing it, there were 2 or 3 or 4 basic aspects. For example, we have the impact on mobility, and maybe we could anticipate them on your presentations, but we are identifying challenges, like, for example, integrating the public service with with private data platforms. On one side, on the one hand, we have the technology platforms, and on the other side, we have on the other hand, we have the city councils. Part of the data are on the network, part belong to the users. Another part has to be integrated to give some consistency, some safety, some treatment. The cell phone was some kind of opportunity. We all have a hyper skilled cell phone that allows us to talk to any entity, to talk to any business model, and to manage our payments. And it's something that we should take advantage of in order to set every layers of apps that would be available both for the cell phone and for the citizens. We are speaking about increasing that homogenization. We are talking, for example, with the General Traffic Association to look for some consistency in urban regulation. We can't move from one city to another and having different traffic regulations. So the fact that you don't know the law doesn't mean that you don't have to fulfill it. But as far as we have many regulations, it's quite difficult. So there's an effort that at a local level, someone has to play a role. There are functions that the government had not distributed them, and we should order them up to see who assumes a coordination role. Same happens at the European level. There are regulations that if you want to travel from one city to another and you are at the border, for example, between Spain and France, it's interesting that your autonomous vehicle can understand itself with the French infrastructure as well as it does with the Spanish one, and there's a long way to go here. On the other hand, in this public transport and mobilities part, we have that social transport to see how the citizens see how they can access an affordable service that plays a good part, that plays an important role in terms of having the right approach. We should have, for example, we could have a pedestrian access through a traditional way, a more traditional way, like, for example, the bicycle, etc. So, regarding mobility as a service, we have big challenges and difficulties. For example, we had the public platform and the private platform to offer services, and who is managing those unified pieces of information that allows to have multimodal services. And there was a proposal about positive support instead of penalizing someone. We should use more friendly vehicles, so to speak. So we need to see how things have evolved in order to improve all them. Regarding the sustainable urban development, I think that Jaime will have to speak about urban planning. We were speaking about the possibility of sharing private space with public space. There are examples of private companies that are very useful for citizens. We need to have different infrastructure, etc. different infrastructures will compete. And it's an infrastructure that we'll have to see how it gets along with the rest. We were speaking about avoiding traffic jams, to have relaxed traffic. The traffic could have a constant speed. We have pioneered some measures that were a little bit controversial, but it seems that these measures are working. And we have worked to align the European funds, and we want to evolve towards a mobility that doesn't have any accident. It's a challenge that technology, where technology can play a part in order to monitor pedestrians, traffic, etc. And I think that we could see how the autonomous vehicles work and what improvements it could entail for society. And zero emissions, for example, would be important too, that vehicles do not pollute. And in this case, we would be speaking about multi-technology and a rational use. And the last one would be no jams. We want traffic to be efficient, and we don't want to waste time. And there are elements like remote work that are emerging. Right now, the transport demand, because we are either working from home or we're afraid of moving in public transport, can change the different situations, the different paradigms. So European regulation plays a key role. We can do many things at European or Spanish level, but there should be an European revolution that really makes a grade with the US or China. But maybe we're a little bit lost as Europe. What do you think? And I won't give more hints. So if you can speak about the different scenarios, what topics we've seen that could be more or less important, and how we migrate. I mean, this is a dynamic aspect. We are seeing where things are heading to. And we should move in different scenarios. So any hint that you give us in the sense of how you see this migration, well, that would be more than welcome. So just to introduce our speakers, we have SE1 Jaime Balaguer from Deusto, and he was representing the Automotive Intelligence Center, and Iranchu Boris, who works as a technology company at Hertec, and she will speak about everything that has to do with institutional relationship with this PPP and technology that could be embedded in it. So please, you have the floor. Well, Alejandro, you've talked about many, many things, so let's see if I can focus things a little bit. Thank you very much for coming along. Regarding safety, autonomous vehicles, etc., what I see is that until 2018, more or less, there was a great hype of autonomous vehicles. We had Waymo, Tesla, and this has been going down a little bit. However, I think that the Americans have progressed much more than us. They have many more kilometers in terms of experience. Now it seems that in Europe there will be test banks in order to develop these tests, because if we don't have that, technology can't progress. What we've done up to now is to have non-industrial vehicles, very small ones, almost prototypes, that were at a very controlled environment with areas just for them at very low speeds, maybe 15 or 25 kilometers an hour. So it's not a solution, it's not a wide mobility solution. And the Americans, as I've said, have more advanced things. And this has stopped a little bit. And I think that it has stopped because the self-driving, well, and technology to go through a highway is already there. We can do that. But the situation of an urban environment, or if we have a more complex environment where we could have pedestrians or cyclists, that's much more difficult. And it's true, in San Francisco, in Phoenix, there are autonomous vehicles, but traffic in San Francisco or Phoenix is not the same as in Bilbao, and it's not the same as in El Cairo. So it's not an experience that can be conveyed and can be extrapolated this way. So in a highway that's there, the law doesn't allow us to do it, but we already have it. But as soon as you get out of these roads without obstacles, if there are, for example, civil works, or if there are people that are pruning apples, etc. Well, apples or any tree, that would be difficult. That would be another story. It's true that a lot of investments are being made, and I think that we will take an important leap in terms of safety, detection of people, etc. I think that this will play a key role to improve driving safety. That's what I say. Great. Jaime? Well, yeah, thanks a lot, first of all. And some of the points that came to my mind when I was writing my notes is that, well, focusing on that example of that metropolitan Bilbao, first thing, although we have the pandemic, it's important that the forest allows us to see the light. Maybe there are scenarios that could be delayed, others will speed up, but there's a progression that will get to a specific point, and maybe to reject that is not the right thing to adapt ourselves. So taking it to the organ, to the body, to the city planning, I think that's something that we've seen while the lockdown is that we were missing connectivity. And I'm not speaking about digital connectivity, but the capacity of being able to move. And one of the fears that I had, I was like, well, tomorrow they lifted, yesterday they lifted restrictions, etc. Is how much connectivity will we lose? So mobility understood from a bicycle, a vehicle, a skate, but also a plane. Up to what extent this will make us that as an average city we will lose competitiveness because there will be routes that we won't have there for or during a specific time. But I don't want to speak about big metropolis in the US or Asia. Thinking about the need of articulating well understood urban mobility in average or middle cities. Like, for example, the concept that was born in Paris with Carlos Moreno. He was one of the consultants of Fan Hidalgo, of that 15-minute city. It's a concept that is being very famous, and it's going beyond. They are also even speaking about 5 minutes, but maybe in a macro city that could be understood. But today, a city as Bilbao, if we start to walk in 15 minutes, we will have been able to walk through a big part of our city. So we should look for our compound of excellence when being at a competitive world that is competing, and to contribute solutions that are able to go beyond our territory. And with this, I think that it's very important that when we speak about mobility, because of some reasons that I've been able to listen, to read, we are used to seeing examples of OEMs, or mobility companies, that do not come to a middle city because they don't have enough critical mass, or for different things. If we look just for profitability, if we look just for a stakeholder, that the OEM the current OEM that, or someone that wants to contribute a car-to-go vehicle or whatever brand it takes, if we think of Bilbao, maybe we would be limited. I think that we should go towards a metropolitan ecosystem. We won't discover the wheel by saying this, but if we go back to that Bilbao before the underground, maybe if we think what we thought when we saw that we were going to have an underground in the city, maybe we were a little bit skeptical. It was, we don't have enough critical mass, this makes no sense. Well, some things. Today we are unable to understand the vertebration of the city without these solutions. For example, with the skates, we didn't think that we would have them 1 year and a half ago, not with service supply providers that are here to stay. Maybe the citizens say, well, I prefer to have this, but there has been an evolution. And we don't understand the capability of doing this without thinking of this metropolitan context. There are scenarios that could seem very far away from here. And I always speak about New York. New York, if you have the chance to be there, or if you know someone that lives there, this is not something for now. Nobody owns a vehicle in New York, but this is something that has happened for more than 20 years. No one. First of all, because you can't pay the your parking place. It's just a move that has emerged in the city. That's a spontaneous movement because of the real estate market that provoke this, because there are citizens that make this happen, and it takes you to a situation where the citizens understand how they need to adapt or what the ecosystem is. And this is a situation that we face with new generations that arrive, and maybe they can cheer us up to see that real estate changes, mobility changes. Any business niche depends on a revolution from channel TV. You know, if you turn on TV or if you log in a platform, the press model or any kind of service, it also comes to the mobility model. And the need of having something in property vanishes. I always like to put examples, and I always like to speak about Transport for London. It's something that it's a very flexible authority when integrating mobility needs as in the public sphere. It's like, well, we know that this need exists. How can we make it work, and how can we provide the service? So maybe learning out of this agility. Well, it's not about doing things and taking things for granted. I think that having this leadership is important. We need to change the concepts, of course. If we were speaking about Paris, that is leading with that 15 minutes model, well, there are things that have not worked, like, for example, developing an own vehicle with a French technology, manufacturing in Britain, La Bretagne, etc. So there are things that have not worked. So you realize that the service can be. And new stakeholders emerge. In this case, Renault Zoe, then maybe in 2008, it went into electrification when nobody was doing that, with subsidies, with support, with whatever was stipulated. That makes us understand that we need to have that view. And we need to see whether that urban planning is done either from the institutions with the corresponding leadership, and I'm not speaking about the local city council, no matter how big it is, but how you can vertebrate it with an entity such as the local government, with the regional government. But we are speaking about a newer region. It makes no sense to have a limited connectivity. Or we can do this with other example of stakeholders that will want to join, like, for example, Uber, or American stakeholders that would like to provide mobility service, with the problems that it entails with the taxi world, etc. But I believe in the strengths, on the need of strengthening the European ecosystem in the sense of, urban planning and general context. And I would like to speak about Volkswagen. Volkswagen wants to develop pilot projects at different places. And 1 year ago, it went to a Greek island, and this was going to be an island with sustainable mobility, where they are subsidizing a pilot project to see how connectivities worked throughout the territory. And I see this as an opportunity, because I'm tired of listening that, well, these big cities where we are always developing the pilot approaches, of the desert in Arizona, well, it's very difficult to set up an autonomous vehicle. We need to believe that we can contribute a solution, different test banks, so that we can see different types of things. And within the urban planning, access to energy, for example, when trying to provide this energy to vehicles, that's key, of course. We'll have to facilitate it, because what's not easy can't be understood. And if we take cell phones, I'm sure that you have an operative system with an Apple. And the main strength is the user experience. And the user experience will be the key, because it's we, as citizens, on a daily basis, we understand that it's not easy and that we need to make an investment that won't provide us with any benefit. We won't make that investment. And a brief remark about geopolitics that I love, by the way. We are in a very deep wave of electric vehicles. I think that it's very important to speak about multi-propelling. I think it's important for every circumstance, and we've seen such a difficult year of 2021 that started with many events in Washington, D.C., and now it has to do with the independence of security in the Indian Pacific, with India, France, US, and the United Kingdom. And if we take this to propelling, I see, of course, clean. I think that if we want strategic safety as a continent, as Europe, how should we do this? Thinking of a technology such as hydrogen, that does not depend on minerals, on land, on weird raw materials that are in hands of private or semi-private or public agents like a Chinese government. And, well, this is what I would have to say. Great, Jaime, thank you very much. It gives a lot to think. I was thinking of power plants, but maybe talking about power plants right now wouldn't be very good. Well, in France, it is. I think that this would be a very long discussion on new technologies that are coming wave after wave. So, Iranchu, regarding infrastructures. So, after such passion, well, it's great to listen to you all. I'd like to focus on the infrastructure. We've talked about the autonomous vehicles, different solutions. They are here to adapt to the city. And how can we get close to them? How can we land them, if you allow me the expression? It's important, as you were saying, to digitalize the infrastructure, because it creates a lot of information, many pieces of data. How should we manage all this? How should we put this in common? Well, there are some initiatives of data platforms, hubs, open data, etc. And these platforms will facilitate and will allow us to implement different AI models and big data analysis techniques that maybe could help us foresee how our highways will evolve, how our streets will behave, how will they be, if there's any black point, what the peak hours will be, how the traffic is going to evolve. And in this way, we should be able to manage these spaces, these lanes. Maybe at a specific point, we can say, well, this lane is for autonomous vehicles, or for this urban service based on a vehicle, with a level of automation. And besides, these platforms, when integrating the information that is available, they allow us to offer these services to our citizens, to our users. And in this case, it's going to be, PPP is going to be very important. We were saying that it's both a public and private topic. They have to live together because of, as it happens, in the cities and the infrastructures, there's a supporting governance, so to speak. There's a supporting administration that has to be there, that has to be present. And eventually, it has to be the auditor. It has to be with that verifying role to see that the information that we're conveying is true and correct. Because in these scenarios where we have new sources of information, well, we have a more sensorized infrastructure, we have more data. We need to integrate them. We need them to be consistent, and from there we need to develop those services for the citizens so that they facilitate that living together and deploying new services. To launch all these initiatives, we will need to have this technology deployment. We'll need communications technologies, and we are speaking about 5G. It will be very important to take standardization into account, not only at communication technology level, but also at data format level. How are we going to understand among ourselves if there's a traffic jam here? I'm sending this information as an administration, and you have the system, and you're identifying that there's a traffic jam here. That warning, that message should be conveyed the same way. Equally, we need to standardize that user interface. The user, no matter someone from Bilbao or someone that comes from San Sebastian, he needs to have the to receive the information in a unified way. That user interface has to be the same, and that will allow all this technology to be well understood and interiorized by the users. And this is what I could say. I think that we have had a lot of hints to try to fit the different scenarios, how we measure what can take us to one side or to another. My opinion is that we are some kind in the middle, and maybe there are two alternatives: an aligned Europe, or a citizen that, although Europe doesn't give a uniform solution, they can take advantage of the regulators so that they can compete with the American setting of technology. So I would like you to ask them, because we have three stakeholders coming from the think tank. They have lived with this dynamic, and they have a structured mind and a trained mind. I think that they will have a capacity to integrate questions that you can ask them with a level of difficulty that you consider.
A mí me gustaría, sobre lo que ha dicho Irancho, el tema de...
Regarding what Irancho has said about the common data, exchanging data, how important it is so that data have to be interoperable, and this way we should be able to use data. There are big American companies that have very detailed information of all of us, but in Europe we can't take anything, where they don't even want to take any personal piece of information. We need to have a test bank that allows us to move on. We need to frame the progress and to see how it has to evolve. I think that that's key. Estibaliz, how do you see it? Because it's very slow from a regulation point of view, and we are not competing either against Americans or Asians. So should be Europe who pulls out of all this? Should be the citizens? We have the mobility here. We have information about resilience, about food, to access cargo, for example, and we don't have a European platform with an interoperable information. We don't have a European passport. This was a very close scenario, and it goes to 2023. So taking this opportunity, taking this demanding, vital moment, we have not been able to do something as basic as having an interoperable piece of information to enable different business models, etc. So the pace seems to be slow. So it's going to pull Europe or citizens. Well, in order to have a global and interoperable point of view, if it comes from the citizen, it's going to be very difficult that everybody decides the same. It has to come from top down, I would say. If it goes downside up, it would come through islands, through countries, but I think that it has to be a top down. It was coming to my mind when in 2020 many COVID radar apps were being developed, and there were no homogeneous ones. There were different apps. I think that they have all, well, you know how you use the apps, if you even downloaded it, if you use it as you should, if you used it correctly, and the different aspects that it entailed. Sometimes human factor don't work as, don't work as things should be. And sometimes it doesn't follow the algorithms. We're seeing this with the vaccine certificates. So between the regulation in the US or China's dictatorship, sorry for being so rude, I aspire to the fact that Europe positions itself as a place where we are technologically competitive, but with our own label. We are in the center, we are doing this, etc. So I'm going to say, well, it's really not worth it. We can't compete against these ones. So think about the Scandinavian countries. They have a very specific model with its limitations, of course, and its problems. But they have been giving an example. They have been walking the talk, and they are just chasing their goals. So maybe this could be extrapolated to European policy, to be at that place where we want, from the middle of what it means for the citizens, we want to be there. Are we losing opportunities? Yes. Is there any way to protect ourselves from Googles or Microsofts or Amazons that don't care about being fined with 5 billion euros because they've made a calculation and they know that it's profitable? Or will we buy products, very cheap products? What are we going to do? So we'll have to think about it to see what we can do. We need to see how to face those challenges that I have on the table. Yeah, totally agree with my colleagues. Politics have to come from, well, they have to be top down. I mean, the citizens have to work based on what politics determine, but they need to come top down. And at European level, I think that we should bet on that. Maybe we could use models that are already ongoing. But yes, absolutely, yeah. Something that has already been said. Maybe in Europe we can use a more ethical model about how managing data, etc. So, do you have any questions? I don't know if we have more time. No, we're on time. Okay, so according to what they have been saying, I think that the regulation challenge is clear: to put the citizen in the middle, in the center, multi-technology too, to take advantage of territories, ecosystems, etc., as the one that we have here in the Basque Country, of 15 minutes or 1 hour, to bring pilot projects, to bring companies to try autonomous vehicles models, to digitalize infrastructures, to have an interface with the user that both the public administration and the private business models can reach in an easy way, an integrated way. And there's a lot to do. COVID has proven that we have a lot to do. We tried to follow a pattern during the COVID with 100 people and to see every aspect that we had been analyzing. Of course, we will go through different situations that will make us evolve. Thank you to the participants. Thanks to Matrix, because we have Eduardo Valencia here. He's a think tank manager. Thanks for keeping it alive with such a strong dynamic exhaust votes. Thanks to Idoia for participating and for giving us this opportunity to work on the social impact and to link this with the challenge of scenarios in the city of Bilbao. And of course, thanks to Petronor for leading this event and speaking about different approaches that have been quite usual in this industry. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you all.